The second type of loop that Java supports is a do-while loop. A do-while loop is similar but not exactly the same as a while loop. So the do-while loop looks like this. We have the keyword do and then brackets followed by the keyword while, and then inside parentheses goes a condition followed by a semicolon, and inside those brackets goes a collection of statements. And the do-while works like this. First, we execute the statement. So this happens first. Then after executing the statement, then we check the condition. If the condition is true, we go back to step one, which is execute the statement. So after that kind of first execution of the statement, it goes through a similar process of check the condition, execute the statement, check the condition, execute the statement. Once the condition is false, we move on to whatever line of code happens after the do-while. So the big difference between a while and a do-while is that a do-while is at minimum executed one time. So remember that it's possible for a while loop to execute 0 times. That's not possible with a do-while. A do-while will always be executed at least once because we execute the code inside before we check the condition. So that's the big difference. Many people find do-whiles a little bit confusing to use, so you won't see them used as often as you'll see while loops. I don't know why. People just don't tend, they're not as easy to understand. I personally prefer while loops as well. I don't know, a lot of people have that preference. So you're welcome to use them. You're welcome not to use them, but you will be expected to be able to interpret them if you see them in someone else's code. Now, which one should you use, a while or a do-while? Well, if you want to use one of those two loops, first of all, the reasons for using the do-while loop are the same as the reasons for using the while loop. You want to use it in situations where you don't know in advance how many times something is going to execute, or in situations where you are getting input from a user and that input is going to determine the condition. But when you're determining between a while versus a do-while, the questions to ask are, well, do you want the condition evaluated before or after the code is executed? With a regular while loop, you evaluate the condition beforehand, and with a do-while, you evaluate the condition afterwards. So perhaps there's something about when your variables are updated that answers that question for you. Another question you might ask is, do you want the code executed always, once, so at least once all the time, or possibly not executed once at all? Now, in the examples we just did, these probably both should have been do-while loops, because in both situations, we always wanted to go into the loop at least once. Right here, we know we want to read in at least one number from the user, because even if the user just wants to quit right away, we still need to read in an initial 0 to know that. And similarly with the math program, even if the user wants to quit right away, we need to read in one number to identify that it's a 7 to know that. Okay, so both of these programs technically should have been do-while loops if we really wanted to think about logically what was the most appropriate choice. So let's actually go ahead and convert our running sum program into a do-while loop, because really, again, logically, that's what maybe we think it should be. So instead of having this while here, what we'd have is the keyword do, and then in the closing brackets, that's where we'd put the while, and that's where we'd put our condition, which is still going to be keep reading in numbers, and then we have a semicolon at the end. So really, the code isn't going to look any different from the user's perspective, but logically, this is more clear now that we definitely always want to execute this code one time, and then after the code is executed, then we check our condition. Now, the only other small thing to note about do-while loops is that their variables declared inside the do-while loop are local, just like within all other blocks that we've encountered, if statements and while loops, but they're actually local only to the block, and this while condition is not considered part of the block, which is kind of confusing. But let me show you what I mean. If I were to have declared this Boolean variable inside the do loop, like this, which is oftentimes what people think to do, you'll see now that I'm getting a compiler error, because this variable is now local literally to the block, which ends at this closed bracket and does not include the while loop, the while condition rather. Okay, so if you're using a do-while loop, you need to declare any variables you checked in your condition completely outside of the loop. This is another reason why I think some people find the do-while loop a little confusing, because it seems a little bit illogical that declaring something inside the brackets wouldn't be able to be seen at this code that's associated with the brackets, but that is the syntax of how the do while works. Okay, so again, if you don't know in advance how many times a loop's going to execute, or if you're executing based on input from the user, either a while or a do while loop are very good choices. If you want to use a do while loop, it's a good time to use that if you always want your code to execute one time before checking that condition, then a do while is a good choice. But again, it's up to you whether you choose to use a while or a do while. Okay, so let's write a short do while loop. We're going to write a little text-based slot machine that generates 3 numbers between 0 and 9 and prints them out. And if all 3 numbers match, or if 2 out of 3 numbers match, we'll print a winning statement, and we'll just keep on playing until the user wants to stop. Okay, so I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call it slot machine. And a do while loop is a good choice for this program because we always want to execute once, right? We know the user at least is going to play one time, but then we want to keep playing as long as they want to and stop when the user tells us to stop. So because the loop is based on user input, either a while or a do while would be a good choice. And because I want to always execute at least once, a do while is a good choice. So I'm going to start by just saying welcome to the slot machine. And then I'll start my do, and it's going to loop on some condition. Okay, so my condition is going to be a Boolean. I'll call it keep playing, and I'll initialize it to true. And I'm going to loop as long as I want to keep playing. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay, so what do I want to do inside my loop? Well, I want to generate my 3 numbers. So I want to generate 3 numbers between 0 and 9. So how many random number choices is that? It's 10, right? So I'm actually going to declare a random generator outside of my loop, so I only have to declare it once. And then I'll actually generate the numbers inside my loop. So num1 is going to be generator.nextInt, sending in 10, because there's 10 choices. Again, 0 through 9 inclusive. And num2 will get a new number, 10 choices. And num3 is a new number, 10 choices. Okay, so now I want to print this out to the user. So I can print, maybe I'll print it with some stars. So star plus num1 plus star plus num2 plus star. Something like that. And then I want to print a winning message if 2 or 3 of the numbers match. So I can say if num1 is equal to num2 or num1 is equal to num3 or num2 is equal to num3. So these would be my different ways that 2 of the numbers can match. You're a partial winner because 2 of your numbers match. Okay, and then otherwise, if num1 equals num2 and num2 equals num3, you're a big winner. And do I need an else? Well, maybe it'd be nice to have an else. And then I'll just say, loser, try again. Now, is there anything wrong with the logic of my code as I've written it? What's going to happen if the user spins my little slot machine wheel and they get 555? Well, we're going to hit our if statement, and is num1 equal to num2? It is. And is num1 equal to num3? It is. And is num2 equal to num3? It is. So this is actually going to be true, and we're going to go in here and say you're a partial winner. And because these are linked up if, else, we're never going to check this second condition to say, oh, you're actually the big winner. So one change I need to make is I need to make this my if statement and check that first, because that's kind of my most stringent condition. Okay. So now what do I want my else if to be? Is my else if written properly as is? Well, what happens if the user spins 3, 3, 4? 3 and 3 is going to be equal. 3 and 4 is not equal, and 3 and 4 is not equal, but one of these three conditions is true. So this should be all set, right? So you have to really think about how your conditionals are going to execute, knowing that something might match multiple branches of your if-else-if, and the order in which you list them matters, right? Because remember, as soon as we find a match on an if-else-if, we stop checking. We don't check the conditions of any other branch. So you need to put kind of the most stringent condition first, and then that's the one that will be found, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, post questions about that. Okay, so now if I run my program, oops, what did I forgot to import random. Okay, so now if I run my program, well, this is great, but actually there's no way for me to stop, and I've hit myself into an infinite loop because I never ask the user when they want to quit. So again, it's easy to kind of be writing code and then realize, oh shoot, I never put in a way to get out of my loop. And actually I did get some winners, so that's pretty good. And I notice here that I also forgot to output num3, so we'll output that. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to read something in from the user. So it would make sense to read it after they get a spin. And we'll say play again. And they can enter yes. Enter Y. Enter Y or N. Okay, so now we're going to read in a string from the user. I'll call it user choice. And I need to declare my scanner object. And import it. And since I'm importing two classes from the java.util package, I'm just going to go ahead and import the whole package. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to look at this user choice and determine what it is. And if it's an N, I want to quit. And if it's maybe anything else, I want to keep going. Or I could say if it's a Y, I want to keep going, and if it's anything else, I want to quit. We could also check to make sure it's just a Y or an N, and if it's something else, you know, tell the user they can only enter a Y or an N, but we're going to be a little more flexible. So we're going to say that if the user enters a Y, they want to keep going, and if they enter anything else, they want to quit. So if the user choice, and I'm going to use the dot equals method. So we haven't seen this method before, but the dot equals method is a method you can invoke on any object, and it's how you compare two objects. Remember that strings are objects, so this is what we can use to compare objects. Now the way we've made comparisons for equality in the past is with the double equal sign, but we've only used this on primitives, specifically on ints. So this is what we use on ints, we use the double equal sign, but we almost never want to use the double equal sign on objects. There are some cases when we do want to use the double equal sign, and we'll get into those at a later date. But for now, as a general rule of thumb, use the dot equals method to compare two objects. And again, I will explain why at a future date, and I'll also explain the situations when you would want to use the double equal sign, but I'd say 90% of the time you want to use the dot equals method. Okay, so I'm going to say if the user choice dot equals, and then inside as a parameter, what I send is whatever I'm comparing this particular object to. So I'm comparing this string to the string Y. And if those two strings are equal, then actually I don't need to do anything because keep playing is still going to be true. So actually what I want to compare is whether the opposite of this is true. So whether the user choice is not equal to Y. So if I want to know if something is not equal to, I simply put the logical not, which is the exclamation point, in front of the invocation of the equals method. So again, this is the first time we've seen the use of the equals method, but the equals method is sometimes something we will see and use a lot. So hopefully this first time seeing it is clear. If it's not, please post questions, because again, this is something we will see and use a lot, and this might be the first time many of you are seeing it. So if the user choice is not equal to Y, I'm going to say keep playing equals false. And that will essentially break us out of our loop. Okay, so now I can run my program. I was a loser. Do I want to play again? I enter a Y. Ooh, partial winner. Y, partial winner. Loser, partial winner. I could keep going till I'm a full winner, but I won't make you watch that. And I'm going to enter N, which will quit. Okay. Notice that if I enter a capital Y, it also quits, because equals for strings compares based on case, including case. So capital Y is not the same as lowercase y. If I wanted to ignore the case, there is a special method in the string class called equals ignore case, which is a nice one to use for our user interactions, because really if the user enters a capital Y, they probably do actually want to keep playing. So if I invoke the equals ignore case, now I can enter a capital Y, and that will allow me to keep playing. Okay? So there is an example of the do-while loop, some linked if-else ifs inside with the reminder of the importance of considering the order in which your conditions will be evaluated, and an introduction of the equals and equals ignore case methods.